The sound that greeted the billionaire father after his long business trip wasn't a warm welcome. It was the gut-wrenching cry of his daughter kneeling on the cold kitchen floor, surrounded by scattered trash. The girl was shaking violently, hands clutching her head, desperately pleading with her stepmother. Her father, Richard Caldwell, stood frozen in the doorway of his Greenwich, Connecticut mansion, unable to comprehend that this frightened, broken child was the same vibrant Maddie,
who had once been the sole light in his high-powered life. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it?
By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. The sleek black sedan pulled up to the imposing Caldwell estate, silent beneath the trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn their autumnal colors. Rich Caldwell descended, his tall frame slightly hunched with the exhaustion of a 2-month-long acquisition trip to Asia. He carried a small carry-on and, in the other hand, a finely wrapped box. Inside was the exact vintage doll Maddie had wished for. The image of his daughter was clear in his mind, Maddie running to him, bright eyes, messy hair, and her small arms wrapping tightly around his neck. The thought, after so many days immersed in high-stakes contracts and brutal mergers, was the only thing that had kept his heart warm. He opened the front door. The house was brightly lit, immaculate, yet eerily silent. There were no hurried footsteps, no cheerful voice he knew so well. Rich frowned slightly and called out softly, "Hello? Maddie, where are you?" "Dad's home." No answer. Only the clattering of pots and pans from the kitchen, followed by a sharp, piercing shriek. Rich froze. He dropped his suitcase and the gift box on the living room sofa and rushed toward the kitchen. The voice was that of Eleanor, his second wife, whom he had married just 7 months prior. Normally in front of him, Eleanor was sweet, her voice soft as a breeze, always assuring him she loved Maddie. However, that shriek was loaded with a cutting fury that sent a shiver down his spine. He pushed open the kitchen door, and the sight paralyzed him. Maddie, his 7-year-old daughter whom he loved more than anything, was kneeling on the cold marble floor. Her small hands covered her head, her shoulders trembling violently. Her tangled hair hid her face, but Rich could see the tears streaming down her cheeks. Over the child's head and shoulders were scattered food scraps, vegetable peels, and crumpled papers from the trash can. She was filthy, so wretched that Rich's chest tightened with pain. "Mom, I'm sorry." "Mom, please forgive me." Maddie's voice was breaking. Terror beyond words. Eleanor stood over her, holding the empty plastic bin she had just emptied. Her eyes were cold, and her voice cut the air. "Insolent child. How dare you waste food? You need to learn gratitude. People are starving, and you act like you can have anything you want in this house." Rage surged through Rich. He lunged forward, snatching Maddie out of the corner and hugging her tightly. His voice boomed, firm and sharp. "What in God's name are you doing, Eleanor?" She flinched, but in an instant, her expression changed. She dropped the trash bin, her eyes filled with tears, and her voice trembled. "Rich, you're back. I just wanted to teach her manners, don't you see? She's too stubborn, she never listens. I'm afraid if she continues like this, she'll become a spoiled brat." "I'm devastated, Rich." Rich stared at her, unable to believe the flimsy excuse. He looked down and saw Maddie clinging to his chest, her small body rigid, unable to respond to the embrace. Her tiny hands gripped his shirt with a shaky defense, but her eyes avoided his, as if she was afraid of the very father she once trusted most. "Hey, my girl." Rich lowered his voice, trying to make it sound gentle. "Don't be scared. Daddy's home now. No one can hurt you again." Maddie remained silent, her lips trembling, but she said nothing. Rich held her tighter, feeling how frail and thin she had become. He looked up again, his voice sharp. "Eleanor, emptying a trash can over a 7-year-old's head is what you call discipline? You forget she lost her mother when she was barely 4. She has suffered enough. You have no right to treat her like this." Eleanor bowed her head, wiping her tears with a tissue, her voice muffled. "You think I wanted this?
I just wanted her to understand that nothing comes easy.
I love you, so I wanted to love your daughter too, but she always looks at me with hatred. I only wanted her to learn respect.
Rich clenched his jaw, saying nothing more.
He knew that if he continued, Eleanor would twist everything to present herself as the misunderstood, suffering wife. He lifted Maddie into his arms. She was surprisingly light, nothing like the healthy, energetic girl he remembered. Every beat of his heart ached.
Rich looked down at his daughter.
Her sweat-soaked hair covered half her face, but her eyes pierced him with an unbearable pain. The innocence was gone, replaced only by fear and evasion. He gently stroked her arm, then froze. On her wrist was a dark bruise, as if someone had held her too tightly. His voice trembled as he asked, "Maddie, what happened to your hand? Who hurt you?" The girl flinched, quickly hiding her hand behind her back and lowering her head. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she shook her head, lips pressed tight, unable to speak. Rich's throat constricted. He pulled her against his chest, his eyes lost in the distance. A torrent of pain and guilt surged within him, unspeakable in words. He whispered to himself, a promise and a heavy sentence falling upon him. What has my girl endured while I was away?
Rich closed Maddie's bedroom door as silently as possible.
She was curled up under the covers, face buried in the pillow, her shoulders still shaking. He stayed there for a long time, not daring to wake her, only carefully adjusting the blanket before turning away. Walking toward the living room, his eyes fell on the sofa. The suitcase was still there, next to the carefully wrapped gift box. The doll Maddie had once wished for.
Rich reached out and touched it.
Suddenly, it felt too heavy. He had imagined Maddie's laugh, dreamed of her running into his arms as he joyfully handed her the gift. But that moment never came. The gift now lay there, cold and untouched, a stark reminder that the distance between him and his daughter was silently growing. That night, Rich couldn't sleep. He paced his study, sitting down only to get up moments later. The image of Maddie kneeling by the trash can replayed in his mind like a phantom pressing against his chest. What had Maddie lived through in the last 2 months? The question pierced his heart like a needle with every beat. The next morning, he decided to take Maddie to school himself. She barely touched breakfast, leaving the piece of toast he put in front of her almost untouched. Rich watched her silently, not pushing. He knew the more he pressured her, the more she would withdraw. In the car, silence filled the air.
Rich gripped the steering wheel, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror.
Maddie sat in the back, clutching her backpack tightly, her eyes lost out the window. Her face no longer showed the innocence of a 7-year-old, but a tense, distant expression. "Honey," Rich said slowly, "if something is worrying you, tell me. No matter what you're scared of or anxious about, I'm always here to listen." Maddie shivered slightly, lowered her head, and murmured barely audibly, "It's nothing, Dad. It's nothing." Rich tightened his grip on the steering wheel, frustration filling his chest. He knew she was hiding something but didn't want to force her. When the car stopped in front of the school gate, Maddie quickly opened the door and got out. "Maddie," Rich called out, "I'll pick you up this afternoon. Make sure you eat your lunch." She just nodded, not looking back. The suburban elementary school Maddie attended was a typical neighborhood school.
The children were naturally carefree, but that innocence often brought with it a quiet, reserved cruelty.
Maddie often sat alone, making her an easy target during recess. She sat in a corner of the playground and opened her lunchbox. Inside, there was only cold white rice without meat or fish. She ate a few silent spoonfuls, then stopped, glancing around nervously. Finally, Maddie got up, walked toward the trash can, and threw out the slightly sour rice. Then, among the remnants, was a piece of old bread. She hesitated, then picked it up, shook off the dirt, wrapped it in a worn napkin, and slipped it into her pocket. A group of kids saw her and burst into immediate laughter. "Look, Maddie's eating out of the trash. God, she's a beggar. Don't you have food at home?" The laughter echoed. Some pointed fingers. Maddie's face flushed with shame, her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't respond. She just lowered her head, pressed the pocket against her chest, and ran silently toward the classroom. From the teacher's lounge, Sarah Peterson, Maddie's primary teacher, a woman in her early 30s, small with a severe face softened by kind eyes, witnessed the scene through the window. Sarah had noticed Maddie for a long time. The girl was quiet, often withdrawn, and something always seemed to hide in her eyes. But that day, seeing her mocked by her classmates, Sarah's heart ached. That afternoon, after class, Maddie waited silently by the door, her little hand gripping her backpack tightly. When Rich arrived to pick her up, she got into the car without a word. He tried to start a conversation, but Maddie only replied with a nod or a yes or no. He could feel the distance between him and his daughter growing larger. Later that night, after Maddie went up to her room, Rich received a phone call. It was Miss Sarah. "Mr. Caldwell, I apologize for calling so late." Her voice was calm but firm. "I need to talk to you about Maddie. She often arrives at class exhausted. I've seen her fall asleep at her desk many times, and today I caught her scavenging for discarded food. I believe she might be starving. Did you know about this?" Rich froze. His throat closed, and it took him several seconds to respond. No, I didn't know. Thank you for telling me. I'll look into this immediately." When he hung up the phone, Rich Caldwell sank heavily into his chair. The teacher's words had cut through his heart like a knife. Images of the small Maddie rushed back, her red, swollen eyes, her hunched figure in the schoolyard. Guilt consumed him, mixed with rage, but above all, an unbearable pain that cut off his breath. That night at dinner, the three sat around the table. Eleanor came out of the kitchen carrying a glass of milk, which she placed in front of Maddie with a soft smile. "Sweetheart, drink your milk. Look, you barely eat anything." "It breaks my heart too." Rich watched the scene suspiciously, but Eleanor's tenderness contrasted sharply with the fury he had witnessed the day before. Maddie remained motionless, avoiding her stepmother's eyes. She pushed the glass forward a little, then pulled it back. Rich gripped his spoon tightly, forcing himself to remain calm. He wanted to confront Eleanor, but he knew doing so in front of Maddie would only terrorize the girl more. He chose silence, limiting himself to observing. Throughout the meal, Maddie barely picked at some vegetables, then remained still. Eleanor kept the conversation light, trying to create a warm atmosphere, but to Rich, every word sounded like the hollow whistle of the wind in an empty place. That night, once again, Rich couldn't sleep. Near midnight, he heard faint noises coming from the kitchen. He put on his robe and went downstairs. The glow of the refrigerator illuminated Maddie's small silhouette as she stood on tiptoes to reach a piece of stale, dried bread on the bottom shelf. She quickly put it in her jacket pocket, her eyes moving nervously from side to side, as if afraid of being discovered. Rich stood motionless on the stairs, his chest tight. He wanted to approach her, lift her into his arms, and ask her why, but his feet seemed rooted to the ground. At that instant, he understood that a deep rift had already opened between him and his daughter, one that couldn't be closed with gifts or sweet words. It had been his absence, his lack of presence, that had created this void during all the months he was away. Clutching the railing, his vision blurred by tears, Rich whispered into the darkness, "Maddie, what kind of life did I force you to endure without me by your side?" Rich remained on the stairs for a long time until Maddie timidly closed the refrigerator and crept back to her room. He then descended, opened the still-lit refrigerator door. On the bottom shelf was a piece of dry, hardened bread, clear proof of what Maddie had just tried to sneak away. Rich closed the door, the light went out, and the kitchen was plunged into darkness. He leaned his forehead against the metal surface and let out a heavy sigh. A feeling of helplessness oppressed him so much that his chest hurt. The next morning, Rich came down earlier than usual. Maddie was sitting silently at the table, her hair matted, covering half her face. She placed her backpack on the chair without saying a word. Rich looked at her, trying to keep his voice calm while a storm raged inside. "Honey, why did you hide food last night?" "Can you tell me the truth? I need to know." Maddie flinched. Her small hand squeezed the spoon tightly. Her lips trembled. She looked down, and her voice was barely a whisper. No, I wasn't hungry. I just wanted to save it. Rich froze. He knew her words were an excuse, but he didn't have the strength to press her further. The expression of concern in her eyes was suffocating him. He simply placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, softening his tone. You don't have to hide anything. I will never abandon you. Maddie bit her lip and didn't answer. She lowered her head, ate a few spoonfuls of rice, and then got up, took her backpack, and prepared to go to school. Rich watched her leave, his heart unbearably heavy. Later, when Eleanor left the house to go shopping, Thomas the butler stepped forward. Thomas had served the Caldwell family for almost 20 years. He was a man in his 50s, tall and thin, with graying hair, normally silent and dedicated only to his duties. That day, his face showed great tension. He looked around to make sure Eleanor wasn't near, then lowered his voice. Sir, forgive me. I must speak. If Mrs. Eleanor finds out, I could lose my job, but I can no longer remain silent. Rich nodded slightly, his eyes fixed on Thomas. Go ahead. I need the truth. Thomas sighed. His tone was slow but firm. For months, little Maddie has often gone without food. There are meals when Mrs. Eleanor deliberately denies her food, saying she misbehaved. Not only that, she forces her to do heavy chores, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, tending the entire garden. Mr. Caldwell, she is still a child. She cannot bear so much. More than once I wanted to intervene, but Mrs. Eleanor threatened to fire me immediately. I was afraid that if I spoke, you wouldn't believe me, or worse, that Maddie would suffer even more. Rich was speechless. Thomas clenched his hand so tightly that a pen he was holding snapped in two. A vein bulged on his forehead, yet he fought to keep his voice steady. Thomas, why tell me now? Thomas lowered his head, regret evident in his eyes. I know how much you love the child, but Mrs. Eleanor is too cunning. She always puts on a kind face in front of you. I kept quiet, but after seeing her in your arms yesterday, I couldn't bear it anymore. You need to know the truth. Rich leaned back in his chair, staring into space. He wanted to shout, to break everything, but he contained it. His voice broke as he said, Thank you, Thomas. I will take care of this. No one will ever hurt my daughter again. Thank you. That night, Rich forced himself to remain calm. He brought Maddie home and the two sat down for dinner. Eleanor came out of the kitchen with a steaming bowl of soup, a gentle smile on her face. She placed the dish on the table and said sweetly, Maddie, eat. I made this soup especially for you. Maddie remained motionless, not daring to look up. Rich's gaze sharpened, cold as steel, watching every move. Eleanor lifted a spoonful of soup, about to bring it closer to Maddie, when suddenly her hand twisted, and the hot liquid spilled directly onto the child's hand. Ah! Maddie whimpered. Her small hand instantly reddened. Tears sprang to her eyes. Rich jumped up, grabbing his daughter's arm to check the burn. He looked up, his voice a growl. Eleanor! What did you just do? Eleanor immediately backed away, her eyes bright with tears, her voice hurried. Rich, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. The child was just staring there. I lost concentration. It was just an accident. Please don't think badly of me. Rich stared directly into her eyes. He could clearly see the lie hidden behind her gaze. Maddie was trembling as she pulled her hand away, shaking her head softly, whispering, I'm okay, Dad. Rich pulled her into his arms, but rage was boiling in his mind. That night, after putting Maddie to bed, he went into his study and dialed the number of a private detective agency. His deep, firm voice traveled down the line. I need a discreet investigation. My current wife, Eleanor Caldwell. I want to know everything. On the other end, a detective named Ricardo spoke calmly. We'll handle it carefully, Mr. Caldwell. Await the results. Meanwhile, Maddie was alone at her desk. She took out a small notebook, opened it to a blank page,
and with trembling hands wrote, "I miss Mom. I'm scared of my stepmother."
I want to hug Dad, but if I say anything, she kick me out. Her shaky handwriting blurred among tear stains.
Maddie closed the notebook, hid it in her desk drawer, then got under the covers, hugging her old doll tightly.
She fell asleep with fear that night. 2 days later, Rich's phone vibrated. A message popped up from Detective Ricardo. It was accompanied by a photo of Eleanor in an elegant cafe. She held her phone, her face cold and expressionless. Clearly, captured on the screen was a message she had just sent. She is weakening. The plan is working. Rich stared at the image. The blood in his body ran cold. He gripped the phone, his hand trembling violently, then slammed it onto the desk. His face went pale. A single relentless question echoed in his mind. Who is behind Eleanor? And is this plan aimed at my daughter? Rich remained motionless in his study for a long time after reading the ambiguous message. His chest rose and fell with difficulty, each breath heavy with weight. He locked the phone in a drawer and left the room. In the hallway, his steps resonated steadily, as if trying to contain the storm of anger brewing inside him. Arriving in the living room, he saw Eleanor arranging flowers in a vase with the same gentle demeanor as always. Rich stopped, watched her for a moment, then spoke in a grave voice, trying to remain composed. Maddie has lost a lot of weight. Are you sure you've been taking good care of her, Eleanor? Eleanor froze for a second. Her hand trembled as she placed the flower, but only for an instant. Immediately, she regained her soft composure, her eyes shining with tears. Her voice broke as if she were the wronged party. You think I want to see her like this? I only want Maddie to learn to obey better, to be less stubborn. You're always busy. You don't have time to stay home. I've done my best. I love you. That's why I want to love your daughter too. I love you, Rich. Rich crossed his arms, following every flicker in Eleanor's expression. He listened to her words, but his heart no longer trusted. He knew she was an expert at hiding things, but this time, the falsehood was as thin and clear as a veil.
Tomas, the butler, didn't respond. He just kept silent.
And it was that silence that momentarily made Eleanor uneasy. The sound of the doorbell cut the tense air. Thomas went to open it and then returned. Sir, Mr. Ethan is here. Ethan Caldwell, Rich's younger brother, entered confidently. He wore a light-colored suit, perfectly knotted tie, and a smile so broad, it was difficult to suspect any hidden motive. Ethan had long been known for his smooth talk and his effortless ability to win favor with others. Brother! Ethan advanced quickly, embracing Rich warmly, then bent down, extending his hand toward Maddie. Hello, come here, sweetie. I missed you so much. Maddie froze, tightly gripping her worn doll, her eyes avoiding his. She stayed behind Rich, refusing to move forward. Ethan's smile tightened, but his voice remained smooth. You've been too busy, Rich. Let me help you take care of Maddie. A girl needs a woman's tenderness at home. I'm more than willing to help you. Rich looked at his brother. A wave of doubt rose within him. Despite their past differences, he couldn't deny that Ethan always appeared friendly. Rich nodded slightly, speaking slowly. Thank you. But Maddie still needs time. She's not used to it yet. Eleanor immediately intervened, placing her hand on Rich's shoulder, her voice sweet. See, Ethan really cares about Maddie. I think we should let him get closer to her. Rich said nothing, but he couldn't ignore the way Maddie's small hands clung tightly to his wrist, her whole body tense every time Ethan approached. He recorded that image in his mind without saying a word. The next day at school, Maddie sat in a corner of the playground, clutching her ragged doll against her chest. For her, it wasn't just a toy. It was the last memory connecting her to her mother. A group of classmates approached, mischief gleaming in their eyes. One of them suddenly snatched the doll, held it high and burst out laughing. Look at this, an old, broken doll. Only beggars would play with something like that. The whole group erupted in laughter, tossing the doll back and forth. Maddie ran toward them, tears streaming down her face. Give it back, please give it back.
But the children only laughed harder, pushing her back.
Maddie fell hard to the ground, scraping her knees on the pavement. Just then, Miss Sarah Peterson appeared.
Her voice resonated firm and authoritative.
"Hand it over right now."
The children froze, quickly dropped the doll and ran off.
Maddie grabbed her doll again, sobbing uncontrollably. Miss Sarah knelt, gently wiping the tears from the girl's face with a tissue, her voice now tender. "Maddie, you have to tell your father. You can't carry this burden alone, understand?" Maddie
shook her head, her words choked by sobs. "If I tell him, Mom will kick me out."
Miss Sarah hugged the girl lightly, her heart aching. She knew this couldn't continue much longer. That afternoon, Rich returned home. Passing by Eleanor's room, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. A thin line of light filtered out, making him stop. He pushed the door, about to call her, but the room was empty. On the dresser, a drawer remained half open.
Rich approached and saw an old phone inside. He picked it up, and the screen lit up as soon as he touched it.
A series of messages appeared. The words hit him like a knife, his heart pounding with pain. Recipient: Ethan. Message: make him believe his father doesn't want her. When she breaks, he will too. Rich froze in horror. His hand was trembling violently. All the doubts he had carried with him converged into a single terrifying image. Eleanor and Ethan had been orchestrating everything from the beginning. He squeezed the phone tightly, his face turning pale. A silent scream echoed in his mind. "My own brother. Why would you want to destroy this family?" The house was plunged into darkness, only a faint yellow light from the hallway illuminating the place. Rich walked slowly on the wooden floor, his mind still replaying the messages he had just read on Eleanor's hidden phone. Every word, every punctuation mark, was etched in his memory, leaving him between fury and despair. He had sensed something was happening behind his back, but he never imagined the cruelty could go so far. Reaching the stairs, a muffled sound broke the silence. At first, it was a choked sob. Then it turned into a heartbreaking cry. Rich stopped short. His heart clenched, his steps quickened. The crying came from Maddie's room. He rushed over. The door was ajar. He pushed it open hard, and the scene before him paralyzed him. Maddie was kneeling on the floor, hands covering her face, her hair matted, tears streaming down her cheeks. Standing over her was Eleanor, dominating her, her hands still raised in the air. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, suffocating. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mom. I won't do it again. I was being disobedient." Maddie's voice was trembling. Eleanor leaned down, grabbing the girl's shoulders, her voice sharp, every word like a knife. "You are nothing but a burden. Rich's father doesn't need you. If it weren't for me, they would have abandoned you long ago. You're nothing but scraps in this house." Rich exploded. He rushed forward in a fury, his voice booming throughout the room. "Eleanor! Get out! If you stay in this house one more second, I'm calling the police immediately." Eleanor flinched. Her eyes widened. She released Maddie and backed away a few steps, her face losing all color. But the next instant, tears began to stream down her cheeks. Her voice broke with false, mournful pity. "You're letting her fool you, Rich. That child only invents lies to separate us. She's manipulative, don't you see? I only wanted to teach her respect, but you trust her more than me." Rich took another step closer, his eyes burning. His hand pointed directly toward the door. His voice thundered, sharp as steel. "I don't want to hear another word. Get out immediately, or I will call the police right now." "Eleanor, don't test my patience." Eleanor's mouth hung open, tears still running down her face, but a gleam of rage shone in her eyes. She turned sharply, grabbed her purse from the bed, and slammed the door as she left. The sound of her heels faded down the hallway, leaving behind a room plunged into terrifying silence. Rich dropped to his knees and wrapped Maddie in his arms. Her small body was trembling violently. The girl buried her face in her father's chest, sobbing uncontrollably.
Rich felt every tremor pierce his heart.
He held her tightly, whispering in a voice hoarse with guilt.
Maddie, I am so sorry.
I left you alone for too long. You don't deserve any of this. No one will ever hurt you again, I promise.
Maddie sobbed brokenly, her small hands clinging to her father's shirt, as if letting go would make everything disappear again. Rich simply held her, letting her tears flow and silently mix with his own. After a while, when Maddie was exhausted from crying, he carefully lifted her and settled her into bed.
He pulled up the covers and brushed the sweat and tear-damp hair from her face. Maddie's eyelids slowly closed.
Her breathing was still shaky, but her hand held tightly to her father's shirt. Rich sat beside her, holding that tiny hand until she fell asleep. Afterward, he got up and silently opened the door.
Upon leaving, he encountered a familiar figure. Ethan was leaning against the hallway wall, his expression inscrutable, the corner of his lips curved in a faint smile.
"Brother,"
Ethan murmured softly, just loud enough for the two of them to hear. "You can't raise her alone. You have a company, an entire empire to protect.
A weak child like her will destroy you, just like she destroyed Eleanor." Rich froze. His heart hammered against his chest.
He stared intently at his younger brother, never blinking. That sentence was more than a taunt.
It was a warning, perhaps even a threat.
Ethan took a step forward, placed a hand on Rich's shoulder, squeezing lightly, and whispered, "You should think carefully."
"Rich, there are things that aren't worth sacrificing, not your career.
Not your reputation." Rich looked at his brother's hand on his shoulder, then lifted his gaze, his eyes blazing. A new flame ignited within him, stronger than the fury he had unleashed on Eleanor.
It was the raw pang of betrayal from his own blood. He pushed Ethan's hand away and walked straight to his study without saying a word. However, in his head, Ethan's words resonated, venomous as a snake's hiss.
"She will destroy you." Rich's eyes burned with determination. He knew then that the true enemy was not just Eleanor, but his own brother.
Before we continue, please take a moment to leave a comment about this story and rate it from 1 to 10. How are you feeling?
If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen.
I hope you find a moment of peace and reflection as you follow this healing story and its journey of courage and justice. Rich slammed the study door. The sound, muffled by the heavy solid wood, was a declaration of war.
He locked the hidden phone in his own secure safe, a piece of evidence that linked Eleanor's domestic abuse directly to Ethan's corporate sabotage. He knew then that the true battle wasn't for a divorce settlement, but for the very soul of Caldwell Tech and his daughter's life.
Rich's focus became absolute. He understood Ethan's cynical plan was to isolate him emotionally through the tabloid scandal involving Maddie, forcing him to neglect the company.
This neglect would then trigger the moral turpitude clause in the operating agreement, allowing Ethan, as the CFO, and his co-conspirators to seize control. For Rich, the time for subtlety was over. The next few days were a blur of high-stakes corporate maneuvering.
Rich appeared in the office, focused and dangerous. He delegated less and scrutinized every financial and security report personally.
Ethan, oblivious that Rich possessed the cell phone evidence, grew bolder.
He used executive meetings to question Rich's leadership, subtly referencing the tabloid rumors about
Maddie's unstable condition and Rich's distracted management to push his agenda. During a critical strategy session concerning the new Asian semiconductor contract, Ethan cornered Rich, feigning concern.
"Rich, you look exhausted. Maybe you should take some time off. Focus on the family issues."
"The board is getting nervous about the press and the stock price," Ethan suggested, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon.
Rich met his gaze, his voice flat.
"The company is fine, Ethan. Are your personal investments secure? I noticed a large liquidation of your portfolio last quarter." Ethan flinched at the subtle but precise threat, but quickly forced a smile. The corporate battle peaked during an emergency board assembly. David Sterling, a long-time respected shareholder, raised the matter directly.
"Rich, the stock has taken a hit due to the negative press.
We need assurance that the company's reputation won't be dragged down by your private issues. We need guarantees. Rich was ready to fight, but Ethan cut him off, smoothly seizing the narrative. Gentlemen, I've been by my brother's side through this entire family ordeal. But the company comes first. I am ready to step in and provide stable leadership to manage this media crisis until Richard can regain his focus. Several board members nodded, swayed by Ethan's apparent sacrifice. Rich realized Ethan was seconds away from orchestrating the coup. That night, Thomas the butler, driven by his unwavering loyalty to Maddie, came to Rich's study again. He revealed that Eleanor had confessed Ethan promised her a significant sum from the buyout once Rich was pushed out. More chillingly, Thomas confessed Ethan had asked him to quietly dispose of some things from his office, including an old, inexpensive camera, the kind used for quick surveillance. He said it was just junk, sir. But I found it unsettling, Thomas whispered. Rich's blood ran cold. The low-quality, grainy photos of Maddie picking up scraps. Ethan didn't just leak the photos. He staged and took them himself. Thomas' testimony confirmed the full depth of the conspiracy, linking Ethan not just to corporate fraud, but to the intentional public humiliation of his own niece for financial gain. Meanwhile, the media storm intensified. Tabloids splashed headlines. Tech titan neglects daughter. Heiress seen scavenging for food. The images of Maddie, small and desperate in the schoolyard, went viral. Maddie, seeing the headlines in secret, broke down. It's my fault. Dad got hurt because of me. If I wasn't so bad, everyone wouldn't hate him. She sobbed. That night, Rich, his eyes red from sleepless fury, received the final piece of his defense. Sarah Peterson, Maddie's teacher, arrived with the worn composition notebook. Mr. Caldwell, I believe this can help you. It's Maddie's personal journal. It's the only voice that can save you both, Sarah said, handing him the book. Rich opened it. The childish, uneven script appeared. I am hungry. I am scared. I miss Mom. He flipped through the pages quickly. Each line was a cut. Eleanor makes me scrub the floors. I want to hug Dad, but I'm scared if I tell, I'll be sent away. I want Dad to look at me and smile. Rich's grip on the notebook tightened, tears falling onto the page. Sarah's words echoed. Use this honest pain. No defense is stronger than this. Rich pressed the journal against his chest. He knew his only path was a public act of brutal honesty. Rich called an emergency shareholder meeting, gathering the key corporate players in the boardroom less than 24 hours later. Every crucial board member, including the skeptical David Sterling and the ethically focused Elizabeth Hayes, was present. Rich entered with a firm, deliberate stride. In his hand was Maddie's small journal. Walking right beside him was Maddie herself, dressed in a simple dress, clutching her worn doll. Her small hand was firmly clasped in her father's. Tomas and Sarah followed, a formidable team of truth. Rich stopped at the head of the table. His voice was steady and resolute. You want the truth? I will show you the truth. Not manipulated photographs, not tabloid rumors. This is the plea of a 7-year-old girl. He placed the fragile notebook on the polished oak. The soft thud echoed. Rich opened the first page. I am hungry. I am scared. I miss Mom. The words hung in the suffocating silence. Rich looked up, his gaze sweeping over the tense faces. He read directly from the child's scrawl. Eleanor said if I tell Dad, she'd kick me out. I miss Dad. I'm scared he won't want me anymore. David Sterling sighed heavily. Elizabeth Hayes frowned, her stern demeanor cracking. Whispers erupted, quickly turning into glares aimed at Ethan. Rich gently leaned down and whispered to Maddie, loud enough for the room to hear. You don't have to hide anymore, Maddie. I'm here. I will protect you. Suddenly, Ethan leaped to his feet, his face red with panic, his eyes burning with fury. Lies, this is a farce. A child's scribbles can be faked. Rich is inventing stories to cover the truth of his abandonment. Before Rich could speak, Thomas stepped forward, his voice hoarse but firm, ringing with integrity.
I witnessed it all. I saw the child drink water instead of eating dinner many nights. I heard her crying, asking, "Daddy, are you going to leave me?" I stayed silent for fear, but I cannot remain silent now. This is the truth. The room reeled. Sarah Peterson stepped up, corroborating the account, detailing Maddie's exhaustion and the scavenging for food. A mother of another student, Linda Chen, rose from the back, tearfully confirming she had seen Maddie picking up scraps. Ethan was shaking, sweat pouring down his face, his composure gone. He hammered his fist on the table. "You are all being fooled. He stole everything from me since we were kids. You were always the beloved, the perfect son, and I was abandoned. And now you use your own daughter to destroy me? I won't allow it. I swear I will make you lose everything." Ethan stormed out of the boardroom. Rich remained still, holding Maddie tightly against his chest, her small body convulsing with sobs. The silence was heavy, broken only by gasps. The small journal's weight had crushed Ethan's facade. Rich looked at the closed door, his eyes blazing with fierce resolve. The truth is out, and I will fight until the end. The next morning, Rich met with Marcus Thorne, an attorney specializing in corporate malfeasance and family trauma. Thorne placed a thick folder on the desk. "Rich, we've tracked Ethan for weeks. These are the emails, wire transfers, and confidential contracts he signed with your competitor in China. He sold proprietary semiconductor schematics to sabotage Caldwell Tech." Rich reviewed the undeniable evidence. No doubt remains. File the charges. Corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit fraud. I will not let him destroy this company or my family any longer. Martha Sloan secured an emergency court order for the immediate arrest of Eleanor. She was apprehended hours later attempting to flee the state, driving a rental car toward the Canadian border. Cornered by the overwhelming evidence of abuse, Eleanor broke down, hysterically confessing that Ethan had forced her into the scheme, promising her a massive cash payout if she helped him trigger the moral turpitude. The news of Eleanor's arrest immediately changed the media narrative. The headlines shifted. Father vindicated. The shocking truth behind the Caldwell scandal. Public sympathy swung back to Rich. Maddie began therapy with Dr. Catherine Rivers, a warm and experienced child psychologist. In one session, Maddie sat on a small couch, clutching her doll, her voice trembling but clear. "I'm still scared, but I want to trust my dad." Rich took her small hand firmly. "You can trust me, Maddie. I will never leave you, no matter what happens." The day of the decisive General Assembly arrived. Ethan, radiating his usual arrogance, walked into the room. Marcus Thorne stood, presenting the evidence on the giant screen. Every leaked email, every offshore transaction linking Ethan to the Chinese competitor. Ethan screamed, "This is a setup. My brother fabricated this to destroy me." The door burst open. Agent David Herrera from the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit entered, accompanied by 2 officers. "Ethan Caldwell, you are under arrest for corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the silent room. As the officers led a struggling Ethan away, he glared at Rich, his eyes raw with hate. "You killed me! You always got the love. Now you've taken everything. That spoiled brat ruined my life." Rich rose, his voice quiet but resolute. "No, Ethan, you chose this path. You destroyed yourself when you chose greed over family." The trial concluded swiftly. Ethan Caldwell was sentenced to 25 years for corporate espionage and conspiracy. Eleanor received 15 years for abuse, negligence, and psychological harm to a minor. In the courtroom, after the sentences were read, Rich knelt, embracing a tearful Maddie. Her voice, though choked with emotion, was clear. "Dad, now I really believe you'll never leave me." Rich held her tight, resting his cheek on her hair. "You are my entire life, Maddie. Nothing and no one will ever change that. I will always be here." Time passed. A year later, the Greenwich mansion was sold. Rich and Maddie moved to a warmer, more secluded estate in Napa Valley, California. Rich stepped down as CEO, taking a permanent role as chairman, focusing his vast energy and capital on a new purpose. He founded the Safe Harbor Foundation, dedicated to children who suffer from parental alienation, neglect, and abuse. The foundation's name, chosen by Maddie, honored the safety they had finally found together. At the foundation's grand opening gala, Rich stood on the stage beside a visibly confident Maddie, now 9. She still held her old worn doll, but her face was radiant, her eyes bright with faith and love. Maddie stepped up to the podium. "I used to be so scared," Maddie said, her voice steady. "I thought I would always be abandoned. But my dad stayed. He showed me the light. Today, I want to tell kids like me, you are not alone. There are people who will listen and protect you." A wave of emotion swept through the audience. Rich walked toward the stage and hugged Maddie tightly. The applause was deafening. The shadows that had once plagued their home were finally dissolved. Rich whispered into her hair, "You are my miracle, Maddie." She smiled, rested her head against his chest, and closed her eyes in peace. The story ends, but its lesson remains. A father learned that the greatest asset wasn't wealth, but the safety and happiness of his child. Maddie became a symbol of strength and hope for countless children. How do you feel after hearing this story of redemption? Thank you for being with us. Justice exists, and sometimes, a single sincere embrace is enough to restore light to an entire life.